We have 11 in-person meetups coming up. Kathy was going to show it. So we've got the Humanity Expedition to Nicaragua. That is set for February. So if you do want to go to Nicaragua to help support Peter Shaler and Rayo de Sol, please let us know. We don't have a ton of space, but it's going to be a life-changing experience for the folks that go, and I'm very excited about that. Then we've got LA and Dallas meetups there. Then we're going to go to the 150th Kentucky Derby. We are going to New York. Then we've got the U.S. Open. We've got our retreat. Then we've got Head of the Charles in Boston. We've got Miami, and then we just added the Army Navy game in Washington D.C., which we're going to be doing in conjunction with Jason Van Camp and his nonprofit Warrior Rising. And then we end the year next year at Rockefeller Center, which we just did last week. It was a blast. I was probably the worst skater, but I had maybe the most fun. And that's really all that counts, right? So definitely let us know if you want to get in on Nicaragua. We announced our word for the year. So our word last year was impact. Our word this year is purpose. We're going to talk a lot about purpose with Joe Roberts because that's a big topic with him. And then this Thursday, we've got a special treat for you guys. We've got Molly Carr. Molly is arguably the world's #1 violist. Last year, to put it in perspective, she played at Carnegie Hall with Itzhak Perlman, and 3 days later, she played for us in the Outlier project. So you definitely do not want to miss Molly. She'll tell a little bit of her story, how she wound up at Juilliard, how she got hooked up with Itzhak Perlman. She's traveled the world, and just an amazing story. Now she's a professor at Juilliard, but just absolutely incredible. And then we kick off the year with this guy. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, Daniel Rudy Rudiger. So we got Rudy coming up, and we've got the Rudy scholarships. There we go. Joe Roberts has got his Rudy picture. Rudy's a fantastic guy. So Rudy and I decided to give away 2 full ride scholarships to the Outlier project. So the applications will close at the end of this week, and we will pick the 2 winners of those Rudy scholarships. But we're excited about that. And then we've got a whole host of amazing people to join us in the year to come. For those of you who are new, because I did see a couple new members, our format is a little bit different from most formats. So I'm going to talk to Joe for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to open it up for live Q&A. So unlike other things where you put your question in the chat and I ask it, I think there's nothing cooler than to talk to a rock star, like Joe, and you can ask your question directly to Joe. But we are unbelievably blessed today to have an absolutely spectacular human being. Our first conversation blew my doors off. Joe Roberts is with us today. He's also affectionately known as the Skid Row CEO, and we'll get into that. He has dedicated his life to making the world a better place. He walked across Canada, which was 9,000 plus kilometers, pushing a shopping cart for 17 months to raise money for charity. He's had an incredible life that has gone from homelessness and heroin addiction to becoming a very successful CEO. We're going to talk about that. He's one of the best keynote speakers out there. He was the president and CEO of a company called Mindware. He has an honorary doctorate, don't we all? I wish. He's been recognized by the Senate of Canada. He won the Meritorious Service Medal from the Governor General of Canada, and he is the author of this book, which is absolutely incredible, The Push for Change, which we're going to get into. Kathy, without further ado, get us started. Mike Perlow, thank you for that introduction. Joe, what'd you think?
That's pretty cool. Anything that starts with throw to the NFL is it's okay with my books. Yeah, that was pretty neat. Yeah, love it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, my friend. Our first conversation really hit home, and I had shared with Joe, I have a 30-year-old son who has been homeless and suffered from heroin addiction and very similar past. And Joe's story to me is such a story of hope and resiliency, that it really resonated with me. And, it was probably not a shock that we became quick friends. But today, we're going to talk about resiliency and managing change and paying it forward. And really, I think one of the things that Joe talks about all the time is the power of possibility. But Joe, before we get into some of those topics, your story's interesting. So you had kind of this idyllic life growing up, until you were around 8 years old. You had a super supportive parents, and your dad in particular. And then when you were 8, your dad suffered a heart attack and life changed. And so, for those who haven't read the book, help people understand kind of that slippery slope that eventually you went down. And then we're going to talk about the rise and the fall and the rise of Joe Roberts.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and thanks to everyone who's on the call. I mean, I've been a student of personal development for 30 plus years. When you showed Rudy, I had to run and get my signed picture. After the movie came out, his brand was huge, and I wrote a letter and said, "Hey, I got a neat similar story," and he wrote me back and gave me, and then posted out this signed picture. And so, first thing I want to say is you've built me up, and I'm not special. I'm just a guy who had access to resources, who put one foot in front of the other. I think the only difference is I'm 32 years down the road. The story of recovery is perennial as the grass is green. What I've tried to do is just to maximize my opportunities. So yeah, I mean, I grew up in a lower middle class family. We weren't rich, we weren't poor. Dad died early. So there was two things: the trauma of losing dad and not dealing with the grief. That left a hole, that early childhood trauma. And then my stepfather was a violent, abusive alcoholic. So yeah, I went from this guy, my dad, who'd say things like, "I love you, you can do and be anything," to a man who said things like, "You're stupid, you're dumb, and you'll never amount to anything." And so here's what I understand is that all of us walk around with stories and narratives. It's, you get into neurolinguistic programming, we understand that we're really driven by that brain that made up its mind before you were 3 or 6 years old. As we walk around with these stories, the only difference is my story is really extreme, right? But when we talk about the soft skills and the stuff that human beings go through, you may never experience being homeless or a heroin addict or living under a bridge or pushing a shopping cart. The last couple of years has been tough. Change for human beings is hard. And we go through a lot of stuff. There's a lot of emotion around uncertainty, and when the world's shifting, there's just more uncertainty today than there's ever been. And So it's really normal and natural for people to seek something out to alter their emotional state. That's why we drink more, eat more, scroll social media when you should be in bed, why we stay up to 3 a.m. watching the 3rd season of The Crown on Netflix. The Crown isn't even that good, you know? So because we'll do anything to alter that icky feeling, right? For me, it just happened to be drugs. And the problem with that is it has compounding consequences as time goes on. By the time I was 15, 16, I was, kicked out of the house, kicked out of school, involved in the legal system. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I was that kid living in the inner city pushing a shopping cart. The thing that I understand, though, is that regardless of where we ever are in life, our possibility is always 100%. Is it possible for you to let me share the screen? I want to show one picture. If
Sure.
you can give me the ability to share the screen, that would be really, really cool. In 1989, I was that guy. You'd see in any, urban environment in any Canadian or American city. And I struggle with, here, let me just show you this. That was me. Oh, you're going to like this slide, though. I got to show you this slide. Can you see that?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
This is actually a picture of me in 1989.
Wow.
That's hard to see possibility in this guy, but it's there. See, possibility is the opposite of probability. Probability is we look at ourselves and the world around us and we make a distinction or an evaluation of whether we're going to be successful. Now, let's say, for example, something to do with our health and nutrition or losing weight. If we haven't been successful for 15, 20 years, our brain's going to say the likelihood of you being successful is, but if that's not true. It's just that you haven't up till now. Is it possible? Yeah, it's absolutely possible. See, this is the thing that I teach corporations, I teach leaders, I teach kids. Great coaches, what do? They create and draw that talent gap. They take that player and they pull them forward. They pull out of them that possibility. My possibility for years was hidden from me. I came from that normal middle-class family. I had that great dad. But when I lost, dad early, we went to a single-parent family. I was confused and lost. When my brother and his older friends invited me to use drugs, I joined because I wanted community. And that set me on the trajectory, right? So the saving grace for me is I had a mom that wouldn't quit, and she fought real hard to get me into treatment. I stepped forward. I went to treatment. I got my life sorted. I went back to school. In less than 3 years, I graduated, which is interesting because I was a kid who walked around with a story that I was stupid for years. Then I went out into business, and here's something that happened that I wasn't expecting. All of that negative life experience was actually an asset. You think about what we've been through the last 4 years: COVID, division in politics, all of the stuff that's going on, high interest rates, low, food costs, all of the stuff that's been pushing in on us that affects our businesses, it affects our practices, it affects our families, it affects our mental health, it affects our well-being, it affects our peace. And that in turn impacts the relationships we have with others, right? So it's like you had all this stuff going on, and I got that second chance. I went back to school. I did the thing, but when I took that experience out into the business world, it turned out to be my greatest asset. So the crap that's been the last 4 years, when we dig around and we play with that a little bit, we discover that we're not defined by our circumstances, but rather that defines us. And we'll never be able to see the world without seeing it through those experiences. So when I went into business, it was like I saw the matrix. It was so easy for me, Scott. It was like, I remember people saying cold call, like I was in sales. I was selling copiers for Minolta. And they said, oh, cold calling, so tough, the rejection. I'm like, man, I used to panhandle in front of 7-Eleven. You want rejection? Go stand on an overpass off the freeway. That's rejection. This guy just didn't want to buy my copier. Next. And so I had this, it's like I had these skill sets. I knew how to communicate. I knew I had perspective on what a bad day looks like. And I just went out and I crushed it. And I think that so many of us, we've got these things that happen in our life where life lifes us, and they're not always the pretty and the good things, but they help us understand what's important. People giving back, making a difference with your life. I did well in business. I left Minolta. I went out into, a friend of mine started a tech company, asked me to join. I joined, and 5 years later, I walked into the office and I was on the cover of Canadian Business Magazine as a celebrated entrepreneur. I was the Canadian version of the American dream. I'd achieved everything that I wanted. Now, here's the thing, and this is where I think you and I align a lot, Scott, is that I got everything that our culture says makes you happy, and I wasn't. I had the crap on the wall. I had the little glass statues on my desk. I had the on dock. I had money. I drove the expensive German car, but I wasn't necessarily more fulfilled. Martin Seligman talks about the hope circuit, about where happiness really is. And I believe that human beings are their most beautiful when they're in the service of others.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so in 2003, my daughter was born. I left the business world to pursue sort of a thought leadership practice, speaking, working with kids, and that led into working with companies, government. I wrote a couple books. And then in 2016 and 17, I decided, hey, I'd really love to do this Pay It Forward project. And that's where we, come up with this national engagement idea to push a shopping cart, a symbol of homelessness, 5,600 miles across Canada, 2 summers and 1 Canadian winter thrown in just for character building.
What you did there was absolutely mind-blowing. And on the cover of his book, there's a picture of him in a pretty severe snowstorm pushing that shopping cart in God knows where, Canada. Absolutely remarkable. Joe, tell us the impact. Tell us who's Gus. Tell us who Gus is.
Yeah. So my worst days, I was that guy mumbling to himself, pushing that shopping cart in the downtown east side of Vancouver. And on my very worst day, it was 3 days before Christmas, 1989. I was going through opiate withdrawal. And the only way I can describe that for those who may not be familiar with it, it's like the worst flu you've ever had in your life, times 100, except that $10 makes it go away. You get head pounding, sweats, high level of anxiety. So if you think about if you've had the flu in the last couple of years, you're just trying to get through the day. You got no energy. Imagine you're having that on a park bench in the cold Pacific Northwest rain. And that's where I was at. And I needed $10. I didn't want to steal or rob. I went into the bar across the street, sold the only item I had left in the world, and it was a pair of boots. And I walked out on the street 3 days before Christmas, and I'd never felt a level of despair quite like that. And I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how I was going to get through another sunset because life hurts so much. One of the things I talk about, and I'll talk about Gus in a second, Scott, but one of the things that I realize is oftentimes the emotional climate of our lives colors an illusion of hopelessness. And you don't have to be on the street addicted to heroin. It can be a divorce. It can be the loss of a loved one. It can just be depression. There's a lot of that going around. And what I learned is that in that moment of despair, I reached out and I asked for help. And anyways, a series of things happened where Mom came into my life and helped me. But 2 weeks before that event happened, I was sitting on a park bench beside a guy named Gus. And he was a beautiful, compassionate, loving man. He had these piercing blue eyes. And I remember he looked at me and he said, Joe, there's more to you than you can see. Sitting in front of him was a guy with black fingernails, broken teeth, scruffy beard, hair that hadn't been combed in a year, clothes I've been wearing for a year and a half, and just horrendous personal hygiene that comes from living outside. But he looked past all of how I was presenting and he spoke to my possibility. And it was the first time in my life someone other than my mom or my daddy spoke to my possibility, my potential. And he was right. I think one of the greatest things that we can do as parents, as coach, as leaders is separate person from behavior. Support the person, challenge the behavior, and speak possibility into people's lives. Everything that we experience in our world today once only existed in the realm of possibility. Whether that's a human being, whether that's the technology you use, whether that's the airplane that you flew on. This is the thing that we admire about great inventors. It's the thing that we admire about great world leaders. What is it about John F. Kennedy or Nelson Mandela, right? Or Rudy? You know, it's that these are individuals who planted a flag of possibility, something that, you know, draws us to that. I think that great coaches, great parents, great change makers. I think this is what, you know, the Outlier Project is all about. It's about possibility. It's about trying to rise, to be our best versions of ourselves, to go out and put our little dent in the world and make a difference to things that are purposeful and passionate for us.
Joe, you know, one of the things that anyone has to do to overcome the struggles that we all face and to live our version of extraordinary life is we need to take, and I've heard you talk about this, action in the face of fear. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I didn't really delve into is that I was fortunate in building the Push for Change Walk across Canada. I actually, Marie, and by the way, I'm as blessed as you are with Meg. The love of my life is my business partner, and she's constantly encouraging me and helping me sort of move the ball down the field. But Marie and I built the Push for Change. But one of the other co-founders was Sean Richardson, and Sean's a premier sports psychologist. So he's a former Olympic athlete. So he was kind of like my whisperer, you know, and he would always say to me, Joe, put your shoes on, Joe, put your shoes on. And that was a metaphor for get into action. Anytime that we're tackling a new possibility for ourselves, whether it's boundaries and self-care and, you know, or whether it's growing our business, or whether it's on our way into a relationship, on our way out of a relationship. Anytime we open the door to new possibilities, there's automatically going to be resistance. And so how you get a day sober, a week sober, a year sober, how you walk across the country is one step at a time. So working with Sean, we created this IP, this intellectual property, and a model for achieving possibility. A is the action. I is the inspiration or purpose. Simon Sinek talks very well to this, connecting to a sense of purpose. R is acknowledging the roadblocks. You know, this is the thing I love about baseball. Baseball is the only sport that recognizes error as part of the game. Okay, guess what? If you're tackling walking across the country or losing 40 pounds and you've never done that before, or writing a book, or, you know, expanding your thought leadership practice, there's going to be resistance. What is the psychological and situational roadblocks that are going to get in the way? So when you look at that AIR, it's the AIR model, right? Over top of a sort of on top of possibility, right? So it's like, I didn't walk across Canada a province at a time. I did it a step at a time. I didn't get 32 years sober a week at a time. I did it a day at a time. And so sometimes the simplest instruction is to put your shoes on. Put your shoes on. Whatever it is, I don't care what it is. That's always if I'm talking to a guy who's just come in, who's trying to get a day sober, stay to the end, get a phone number, and I'll see you here tomorrow. Don't give people too much. Because here's the neat thing, Scott. I don't care where you're starting from. Oftentimes the anxiety is because you're on the other side of a mountain of hard work. but you can get up that mountain a step at a time, right? It's just to keep your feet in motion despite the emotional climate that you're in. When you do that, and then you connect with purpose. Purpose is like a nuclear reactor. It's like you find, it's like people said to me all the time, Joe, you're so disciplined walking across Canada in the wintertime, minus 40, 70 mile an hour winds. I'm not disciplined. I'm obsessed. You know, it's because it was so connected to a sense of purpose. It wasn't about traversing the country. It was about doing something for kids that came from a place like mine, kids who have all the possibility in the world, but they don't have one person to say, I believe in you. That's what it was about for me. So it's like purpose. And so by keeping my feet in motion and connecting to purpose, I was able to overcome all of those situational and psychological roadblocks. And I've used that model, Scott, to write that's my 4th book. By the way, I'm dyslexic. I've written 4 books. I'm not saying they're good books.
They're great.
Yeah. But it's like, it was harder for me to write the book than it was to walk across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And other stuff. I did a full Ironman. You know, I've done, I don't know, like 50 full marathons, a dozen or more half Ironman. It's just taking that model and applying it. And I'll be happy to share the white paper with you, and you can share it with the group. You can take anything and layer it into this very, very simple model.
Joe, how do you know, one of the most important things to get out of the places that we don't want to be is we have to extricate ourselves from bad situations and toxic people. And that's really, really hard. Any advice for people that are struggling to get themselves away from toxic friends, relationships, situations?
Yeah, I mean, some of that's tough, and there's different nuances depending on which particular situation. So I have a lot of friends who are in the recovery community, and they, you know, it's Christmas time, they're going to have to be around family. And you know, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family, right? And that can be triggering. And then there's all kinds of other stuff, grief and loss, and you know. So I think that it's important to offset that with other people in your community that are good. Find your Gus.
Yep.
And be like Gus. If we're putting out and we're supporting and encouraging someone, that's going to reflect back, right? Whether you call that karma or whether you just call it your reflection. I think it's important. I think that we could solve a lot of the country's mental health issues if every single one of us had a Gus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this is Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger kind of advice. It's like, surround yourself with the right people, the people that are going to hold your feet to the fire, that are going to support you but challenge your behavior. They're going to call you on your poop. I'm here today not because I'm special, because I surrounded myself with really, really decent men who said, I love you, Joe, but that's unbecoming. You know, whether those were people in the business community, the speaking community, or the recovery community, or your spiritual community. Surround yourself with good people. And if you don't have good people and you're building that network, fine. You can still listen to good people on YouTube, on social. Be careful if you're tender, if you're emotionally tender on what you're exposing yourself to. I think that a lot of problems can be solved shutting that social stuff off, especially if you're absorbing. There's only 2 things on social media and the news today: fear and outrage. I don't care whether you're watching the blue channel or the red channel. It's just fear and outrage. That's all that's on. Fear and outrage. Right? And if you're impacted by that, you know, tune some of that out, or choose better it's like, that's junk food. It's not good for you. It's not good for your soul or mind. But I think sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was done.
But before we get to, because we have a ton of people that want to ask you questions, but before we get to that, you have this beautiful story about, I think it was a penny. I know it was a coin, but I think it was a penny that you found. And I just think it's such a beautiful metaphor. Can you tell everybody about that?
Yeah, there's two stories I want to share because I opened one and I didn't close it. When I was in the middle of Newfoundland. Here, let me just yeah, just let me show you. Oh, I don't have it. Actually, forget it. When I was in the middle of Newfoundland, walking across the highway, it was pouring rain, and I looked down on the dirt, and there was a penny sitting in the dirt. What was remarkable is it was raining, and I happened to look down at that time, and the penny was the same color as the dirt, like it was the same kind of brown. And I picked this penny up, and I knew that it meant something because I found it where a penny had no earthly business being. I was literally in the middle of nowhere. And as I walked, the metaphor hit me. It's like I found this penny in the street. This penny had traveled a tougher road. This penny had spent a couple of nights out in the weather. This penny didn't look the same as the other pennies. But what occurred to me as I held that penny in my hand is that by the very nature of what it is, even though it doesn't look as pretty and shiny as the day it was minted, it can never lose its value. And neither can a human being, ever. Doesn't matter what happens. And I kept that penny in my pocket. I walked across the country. When I got to Vancouver, I gave it to President of the United Association of Canada, and he traded me with a check for $1 million. So we call that a good trade. Yeah, that's a good trade. And but the second story I want to share with you is that I'm the luckiest guy in the world because it sounds like I'm all special and I did all this, but I didn't. I had a team behind me. Marie was the team. Everything went through her. She wore over 27 different hats, like roles that she managed. I'm the entrepreneur. I'm the 10 miles up in the sky guy. She's grounded. She's pragmatic. She's operations. But Marie and I dated in grade 10. And she was my very first high school crush. But when my life went sideways, we parted ways. And we reconnected 28 years later. And just before the campaign shoved off, we made it official and became husband and wife. So when I'm reading bullet points on your life, Scott, it's like, by the way, if I went to Vegas, I would have hung out with like Mike Tyson and, Mike Tyson or Elvis. Barry Manilow, come on, man. Come on, man. But the one thing that really jumped out on your bio was how lucky you are and how you talk about Meg. And I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I got to marry and that was over 12 years ago, and we share our life together, and we go all over the place trying to spread a message of possibility and an epidemic of self-worth.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, your dedication to Marie in your book is so heartfelt. It's so beautiful. And you speak about her with such love and reverence. It's a beautiful thing. Absolutely a beautiful thing. And yes, I'm blessed beyond belief to have my version in Meg. Want to answer some questions?
You bet. Original hair color was brown.
And long and shaggy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I saw your college graduation picture. That was quite the hairdo.
Yeah. Change comes slow for JoJo, but yeah.
We're gonna go to Paul first, who is in Florida by way of Hawaii. But Paul, you're up with Joe Roberts.
Oh man, Joe, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. I just want to share something really quick. This really hit me because my dad was a drug addict who passed away when I was 17. So hearing that story was really powerful. I kind of have a two-part question, so I'll be kind of quick. So you talk a lot about possibility, and Impossible Equals Impossible is a show that I kind of created to inspire people to chase their potential instead of accepting their reality. I'm kind of curious for you, what do you think it is that really takes people from impossible to I'm possible? We hear a lot about purpose, why Ben Newman talks about this idea of embrace the burn. I'm curious, like, what do you think that is in your experience?
Well, my experience, and it is just my experience, there's so many different spokes into the same sort of idea. For me, it was like for years, my life, it's like I lived in a house with dirty windows. My light didn't get out, the light out there didn't get in. And so it was a leader. It was people like Gus. And it wasn't just Gus, it was Gus. It was my mom. It was those college teachers. It was my first boss who had a belief in me and held a place for that possibility for me. And by creating that space, it allowed me to enter into it, to encourage me. Now, I'm not saying to be soft and mollycoddle. They, it's that separation, challenge the, support the person, but challenge the behavior. And I think that I was fortunate to be around. Yeah, the timing was good. I was willing to do those things. I also understand, and I teach this in one of my workshops, we can do everything right. Our 50% can be perfect. But at the end of the day, the other person has to be 50% accountable as well. So as a parent, I know I can do my best job, but my daughter, she has to show up. So I don't know. I think that it's about trying to navigate for kids. What are you passionate about? What do you like? What pisses you off? What do you see in the world that you want to change? Because oftentimes, when you look at the push for change and the stuff, there was a lot of things that I was discontented about in how our country, not just Canada, the United States, how they approach some of these issues. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And then, the coaching on that is just take a little step. You don't have to wait till you're ready. A lot of times when you start something big, you're in the fog. We had 27 show-stopping problems in the push for change. 27 that would have stopped the campaign. And we had to continue moving for years, having some of these unresolved. So it's having that faith in your possibility and continuing to move forward. So it's having, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, yeah, that was powerful. And then the other question really quick is, you're one of the top keynote speakers in the world, and I read your LinkedIn profile. You talk about delivering lifelong lasting messages when you keynote. I'm kind of curious, what would you share with someone who's aspiring to get to that level in terms of doing that?
It's difficult unless I knew the person, right? Because it would be different instructions depending on where that individual is at. But practice. In the beginning, I did everything. I did Toastmasters and Rotary clubs. I went anywhere that there was a live microphone. I spoke in schools. I spoke in detoxes. I spoke in recovery. I would go anywhere to speak. There was a decade where I wasn't being monetized for what I do. And then I surround myself around people who are doing it. The cool thing about the speaking business is you can go to, not to promote an association, but you can go to an NSA, or you can go to these places. You can get a coach. You can build relationships. People are pretty open, I found, in speaking, coaching, thought leadership, to share their ideas. It's different. It's not like lawyers or dentists. It's like, yeah, I'll talk to you. I'll tell you what I did for what it's worth. But I think the last thing is you really have to want it. A lot of people have a romantic notion of what it's like to be on stage in front of 1,000 people. And they don't think about having to sleep at the Super 8 and not get any sleep and have your flight canceled. I absolutely love what I do, not because of the standing ovation, because it's my greatest leverage point as a leader to have an impact in this world. I don't need to work. I haven't needed to work for 20 years. I get up and I endure all of that crap because I can stand in front of 1,000 police chiefs and actually impact communities, teaching something to them. So if you're not fully in love with it, if you're in love with it for different reasons, you might run into some challenges and roadblocks down the line.
Wow, that was powerful. Thank you so much. I've taken away that obsession is the next level of discipline. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Great advice. We are going to the good colonel in Illinois. Scott Heathman, you're up. The good colonel in a crazy sweater, but you're still a colonel. So
Can't hear you, Scott.
it's the sweater. It's so loud. It's drowning him out. Still can't hear you, brother.
Still can't.
I
Oh,
can.
there you go.
Yeah,
How about-
good.
Yep. We got you.
Okay. Real quick question. So you mentioned, and I'm kind of on this journey as well, understanding the truths within me. Like I've been programmed a certain way, but diving back into some of that to get to greater possibility. And you mentioned the T word kind of early on, truth. What are some things that have worked well for you, or when you talk to others about getting the truth? What are those things you talk about to get to that deeper level of understanding in order to get to an understanding of possibility?
Not sure I understand your question, Scott.
Again, to get to truth, we got a lot of noise in our head, right? There's a lot going on, we're talking against ourselves, our true selves. We got to peel a lot of those layers back. How do you start peeling those layers back, or what's been successful for you in getting to that ground level truth?
Okay, I got you. Well, you need to rewrite the programming, and that is the lifelong journey, which for the most part you won't be successful at, and you'll die with all these programs in your head. But okay, so that's kind of tongue in cheek. But I think the simple answer to that is actions change our emotional climate. The emotional climate gives us momentum and energy to move forward. And so what happens is that action, behavior, different outcome, action, behavior, different outcome, action, behavior, different outcome. And so for years I was a worthless POS, and I didn't and then I went to, I did sobriety, and over time I rewrote that story. So it's kind of the cart before the horse. Action changes things. So it's like, if I would look at, okay, what specific story do I have? Is it I'm not worthy of money, or is it I'm not worthy of a loving relationship, or I'm not worthy of self-care? I don't know, pick a fight with one of the things that you feel discontented with in your life. And instead of sort of intellectualizing your way through that problem, act your way through that problem. Take actionable steps in a different direction. That's my way of doing it, but I also acknowledge that's only one way of doing it. The belief that I was a 49-year-old non-athlete, failed grade 9 and grade 10 gym, to push a shopping cart 5,600 miles, one Canadian winter across the second widest country on earth, pushed against every fiber of my being. And if I sat trying to figure it out in my head, there's no way I would have ever got up off the bench and taken one step, because there was a mountain of evidence that said, no way, pal. So it's put the shoes on, take the first couple of steps. And as that goes, truth is a subjective thing. It changes. Your truth and how you see yourself changes, and you can rewrite that programming. So that's one way. I mean, there's lots of ways you can do really good, deep regressive therapy with psychologists. You can do neurolinguistic programming. You can get into those places, and hold those things up to the light.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Scott.
Robert in Texas, you're up.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for your time. I just got a quick question. I worked with some of our military guys who have PTSD, and one of the comments that they used to make all the time is you can tell them all day long what they need to do to get better, but until they hit rock bottom and realize that they have a little bit further to go, and they fall through what they thought was the bottom, nothing's going to change no matter what you say to them. At some point, they have to decide on their own to change? What was that turning point for you to actually decide to believe your mom and to believe Gus that there was something more there?
Yeah, I think that there was a couple ways to answer that question, Robert. One is spiritually. It's like I feel that there was something kind of going on. There's a tapestry at play, call it divine intervention, call it, God's hand in my life. So that's one piece of it. So if I was, sort of unpacking that, I could speak to it that way. There's another way that's maybe a little bit more sort of leaning towards what you talked about, which was self-preservation. People around me. So when I was partying as a 17, 18-year-old, it was all fun and games. But when I got into my early 20s and people started dropping, I realized there was a part of me that said, if I keep going down this road, this is not going to end well for me. And there was part of me that said, I got to do something different. And as scary as it was to go home with mom and enter treatment, it was either that or face, going until the wheels came off. So I think part of it was, yeah, I hit that bottom. Now, I've also worked with folks in the treatment sector, and there's ways to raise people's bottoms. I do a lot of work with police, fire, AMBO, not as much with military. I've done a couple of things, so I'm not as, but I know that first responders and PTSD and those things they manifest very similarly. There's ways that you can raise that bottom for someone. And get them to the point where they're willing to take some more action. But you're absolutely right. I mean, in the recovery world, it's the horse to water analogy. I can want change for you all day long, but until you want change for you, it's a one-sided conversation. So in those contexts or situations, I simply let people know, I love you, I support you, I'm here, I'll move mountains to help you. I will do nothing to help you continue in that behavior. So separate person, you're fine, but that's not working for you. And when you're ready to deal with that, come see me. All right.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. One of the stories that resonated with me, one of these military guys, was he had a father who was a police officer and told him, I will not enable you to continue to do the drugs, but as soon as you need me, I'll come running, like you said, knock down walls to get to you. And what brought him to his knees is he watched his friend turn blue and almost die on the floor. And he had the same kind of epiphany that you had, like, I'm next. Fortunately, his friend lived. But that was the next call he made was to his dad. And his dad drove across a couple of states to get to him and said, we're ready to go as soon as you're ready. So having that back support was really good for him as well. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And for me too, that's why I say it's like, for me, I had mom. What if I didn't have mom? I'll tell you this. If I was homeless and addicted to fentanyl on the streets of wherever, pick a city, today is a different world than it was 32 years ago. The downtown east side of Vancouver doesn't look anything like when I was there. So I was fortunate. I had mom. I had access to detox. I had access to a bed. And so when I was ready and I put my hand up, boom, all the dominoes dropped, right? That's why I say it's a fickle thing. It's like I'm here today because of over 10,000 people, not because I'm special.
So good. We're going to Spain. My favorite Olympic gold medalist, Mr. Joe Jacoby. Joe, you're up.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for being here today. And I joined the call a little bit late today, but something that I was just curious about, I love, you really have an amazing way of communicating with people. And I have this image, I've never seen you speak, but I have this image of you on the stage. I have this image of you completing some terrifically high profile events. So it really just kind of got me curious about like the other side of Joe Roberts. Like, what do we see when we don't see Joe Roberts? Like, what kind of things are you working on relative to like self-care and how you kind of feel yourself for the next thing? Like, what does that look like? And what is the part of that you're like, say, working, you really want to work on or improve upon in the year ahead?
Yeah, great question, Joe. I can look great for a podcast, and I can look great for a 90-minute keynote, no problem. All of us can. I'm working on patience. I'm working on being okay in the process. I always want the next thing. So I don't know how to do that meditation, sit on a pillow, be at peace with the world around us. For those that have accessed and practiced their way into really good mindfulness and sitting, I'm in awe of that. What I do is I just pick a new carrot to chase. And it's sort of that high performance thing. It's like I can't make the noise stop. So I hang a new carrot. On the self-care stuff, I'm trying to always improve on diet and exercise because they really impact my mental health. When I get busy going from airport to conference, it's tough to stay and be healthy, but I need to stay and be healthy in order for me to deliver my very best. I've got big, audacious goals, and I want to achieve them in a shorter timeline than is reasonable. And so that creates a lot of pain and suffering in my life. And I have to just be okay with the process. I'm hoping that one day, Joe, I'm okay. It's like, I don't know. I wrote at the very back of the book this sort of philosophical note on you can go out in the world and you can trade your time and you can achieve all of these great things. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. And then I wrote, but be careful what you trade your time doing, because you may miss out on some other big things. And so, I'm aware of that. But that's that that's that prefrontal cortex. That's not what's driving. And so it's this battle. I intellectually know that, but it's difficult sometimes for me to slow down. So I don't know if it's just sort of honest and transparent. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I think, here at the Outlier Project, we often cut the questions and then the response into these little videos. And I'm excited to see the clip from this one because I think you just had like 3 really good book ideas in that response, and which wasn't the goal of the question, but one thing that did strike me and I think about a lot is that I think it can be really tempting for us to, when there's noise, to think about, oh, wouldn't the world be better if the noise went away? And we start to want the noise to go away versus just becoming more aware of what, when the noise shows up and how it shows up and how we can respond. And that's not me wanting the noise to do something versus, choosing to be with the noise in a certain way, which often kind of reframes it in a different way. But you actually said a lot of good things in your response that I am excited to go back and watch on the video clip. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful answer.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. The thing that I've been blessed is I've been around a lot of really high performance people. Sean's introduced me to a lot of, athletes and different folks in the business world too, on my side of things. And I don't know if I'm ever going to make the noise go away. So what I'll try to do is harness it. And that keeps me somewhat grounded. I'm the furthest thing from monkhood, but
Well, I think to me, what also I kind of hear also that if noise in its most basic form is energy, which I believe it is, it has challenge to it, but it has opportunity as well. So yeah, this is wonderful. This is great. I want some others to ask questions. I'm really enjoying hearing you speak today. Thank you.
I think our cleanup hitter today is Lauren in Texas. So Lauren, you are up with Joe.
Hey Joe, I'm so sorry I came in the call a little bit late. I got the time zone wrong. But I did some research on you and I have a question for you. So I feel like any great person, whatever you perceive as great, right? Any great person has something that's stopping them, like that devil on their shoulder. You know, they got the angel and the demon and they're trying to fight both and then they ultimately end up winning with the angel, right? So my question to you is how did you overcome any feelings of self-doubt or that little voice that's like, don't push forward, just stop now. This is too much. This is too hard. How did you push those aside and keep going?
I didn't. This is still there. So action in the face of negative emotion. Take action in the face of negative emotion. They don't ever go away. They might get quieter, but they don't. My experience, this is just my experience, they don't ever really go away. But what happens is over time, you build up enough evidence and you've taken enough action that when you hear that voice, you kind of go, yeah, thanks for sharing. And continue to move forward, even though it's scary. Every time somebody's reading my bio and I'm about to step on stage to 1,000 people, all I feel is I'm an imposter. What does this group want to hear from a junkie that used to live on the street? That's real. And I climb those 3 or 4 little steps and I go out and I rip it. So it's just, it's having, I have good people in my life. I have good tools and process, but it's action. What motivates action is purpose. And acknowledging that the roadblocks, the psychological and the situational roadblocks are with us to stay. Action, inspiration, roadblocks, air. Right. What happens if you sit still too long is the action goes down and the R gets bigger until the shadow of that thing is so big, it's difficult. If you've ever broken the cycle, like you haven't exercised for 2 or 3 weeks, or you didn't do the dishes, or you let your emails, 500 emails, and then you finally say, that's it. And you tackle that and you get to the bottom of that list, how freeing that feeling is because you've done the opposite. You've done the action and you've made the roadblock go smaller. Action is the only thing that I know to quiet the noise in my head. Just put your shoes on. That's what Sean used to say to me all the time, my Olympic friend and psych coach. Every time I'd call him, I'd be like, ah! He says, well, that's pretty normal. You're trying to walk across the second widest country on earth. What are you going to do today, Joe? Why don't you go put your shoes on? And it became this kind of metaphor for go take some action, go do something.
Yep.
I like that. Put your shoes on. Thank you.
It's so powerful. Joe, when in your, I'm just curious, when in your life did you realize that you were an outlier, that you were a little bit different from the average bear?
One of the greatest breakthroughs I had in doing self-work was realizing that, oh man, all my life I thought I was a piece of crap. And I realized when I was a little kid, I had special gifts. The people around me didn't know how to manage that. So I got pushed to the side. And the story I got was, I'm less than. And I realized today, no, I've just always been different. I've just sort of always been weird. I've always been over there. And today, my daughter, she's just like me, except I tell her, fly your freak flag, be different, be unique, go out in the world and let your light shine. Don't shrink. Just be all you, because the world needs more different.
Yeah, I love it. You truly are what this community embodies. And, we're a community of about 700 people and growing pretty rapidly in 34 different countries around the world. What can we do to help support you, Joe?
I think just go out and be your best version of yourself.
Yep.
The universe is taking good care of me. If if you see an opportunity that where someone needs a story like me, I'm always on the hunt to do impactful work with individuals, with companies. I don't do one-on-one coaching or anything like that, but if you see an opportunity, connect with me on LinkedIn. Joe Roberts at the Skid Row CEO, and I want to just do something as a small favor. I love when we get to meet in person, but I'm not going to get to meet you. But what I want to give you, Scott, to give everybody on the call and anyone listening to this later, is free access to the Push for Change book. Just my small gift for you showing up today. And you can share that with family members. It's a great leadership read. It's inspiring, and I know you'll get something real powerful out of that.
That's why you're a special guy. I'm trying to give you a gift, and you're giving us a gift right back. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom, your vulnerability. You're a special guy, and I'm so glad that you're on my radar screen now, and I'm so glad that we have a friendship. And I appreciate you.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is that anybody on the call, if you ever, just in the context of mental health and stuff, if you ever fighting to get through a day and you want to talk to somebody who doesn't have a horse in the race, as long as you tell me you're not going to hurt yourself or others, I'm up for a conversation. I answer my own DMs and emails. So LinkedIn is where I spend all my time. Come out and connect with me there. And if I can help you move the ball down the field, that's the game I want to play. So thank you, Scott. Thank you to everyone who's shown up. Suiting up is half the journey, right?
It is. You stood up well today.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm not wearing pants though. I can't stand up.
No pants, right. Joe did this thing when he first came on, which I think you practiced that a lot in the mirror, because that was pretty damn good. It was the muted no mute, as if his audio wasn't working. I mean, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. That took some practice. So practice. Joe, thanks for joining us, and we'll definitely catch up sometime again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. Thanks.
Best to Marie.
Yeah. Happy holidays, however you celebrate. And
got it.
We'll meet down the road.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Anybody who wants to hang out for a little bit of overtime, feel free.